He was crying in the fog before she could name what it was, a sound like a violin breaking, small and reedy, threaded with animal terror and something older, fossil and metallic. Elena dropped her bag, ankle twisting on slick boards, and the thing on the pier shuddered as if shocked by her breath. Blood mottled its shirt. The skin at its temple was not quite skin in the way her brain expected, but a translucent membrane that shimmered when she stepped closer. She had pulled corpses from nets and stitched gulls back to life in a rain-scented lab. She had never seen grief that looked like light bending around a person. "Stay," she said, the only human word that came up clean against the salt and the cold. It looked at her with eyes that reflected the harbor lights in concentric rings, and for a second she imagined her brother standing where that strange, slender body trembled. Same fall of shoulders, same lopsided scar of a childhood scrape, and the hope stabbed through her like salt on an open wound. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this story has already captured your heart, let us know where you're following from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected twists, emotional reconciliations, or new beginnings, subscribe and stay connected. Now, back to the story. Elena held the light up and watched the fog swallow the beam like a white animal. The creature, Kai, he would tell her his name later, and the sound of it would become a familiar harbor in nights that tasted of rust and perfume. Tried to stand. It faltered and leaned into her, arms feather-light and human-shaped, fingers too long, the nails like chipped shells. Its human skin mask was flawed in a dozen places, a seam at the left ear where the alien fabric had been mended with what looked like fishing line, a hairline crack at the corner of the mouth where something metallic gleamed. Whatever language it would speak was not yet coherent, but its breathing matched the cadence of someone who had been running for a very long time. She should have called someone. She should have backed away and rung Agent Marcos, or the university security line, or the number that would bring men with badges and protocols trained to seal off anything that did not belong to the map of recognized things. She had called those numbers the night the capsule vanished, the night her brother, Mateo, disappeared into a classified mission that smelled of ozone and bureaucracy. She had been refused then. Closed doors, politely worded lies, a silence worse than any answer. Now Elena folded her hands against the cold and decided, not heroically, not with righteousness, but with the private animal cunning that survival had taught her, to keep it quiet. If she could tend this one strange being, maybe she could whisper a name into its memory and foolishly learn whether Mateo had been betrayed into the same dark. "Can you say Mateo?" she asked the thing. The word came out thin and ridiculous in the fog. It cocked its head and did not answer. Instead, it touched its temple and expelled a sound like a bell struck underwater. Images crashed into Elena's mind, memory slivers that were not hers. A corridor that smelled like bleach and engine oil, the hush of people in suits, a window revealing a star like a bruised coin. She recoiled, the sensation not pain but recognition, like pressing a finger to a scar. The creature had not spoken Elena's language. It had learned how to open doors inside her. She hauled it up the pier, half carried, half dragged, into the narrow alley behind the boathouse she rented. The building had been empty for years until Elena moved in with her notebooks and a single aquarium she kept for company. It had the smell of wet cedar and old maps. She set the being on an old couch and covered it with a blanket that smelled of her brother's laundry from years ago. It shivered. When its face emerged, she saw a thin web of veins pulsing beneath translucent skin, like the underside of a jellyfish. Its human hair, borrowed, she later learned, lay in damp, clumped strands against its scalp. It smiled then, a small, deferential curve that suggested gratitude. "Thank you," it said in a voice that was not quite right. Vowels hung in the air like unfamiliar birds. "You did not scream. This is beneficial." Elena's laugh was a brittle thing at first. Beneficial to whom? The creature, Kai, the name came like a tide when he finally brought words into the shape of human lungs, looked at her with that ringed alien clarity and, with no pretense of the secret keeper, said, "To me. You balanced the ledger." Her ledger, she thought immediately, the list of favors unpaid, the nights spent listening to the radio for news of blacked-out launches, the government's thin gestures toward her brother's case, condolences in bureaucratic language, an envelope, a folder stamped "confidential," and then nothing. She had cataloged grief like a tax, paying attention to the smallest irregularities for their hidden meanings. Now a stranger with someone else's eyes sat on her couch and offered gratitude like a coin. She wanted to ask Kai about Mateo and did not. The ache in her chest was too loud. She picked up a thermometer and jotted a number on a scrap of paper, human habits to steady her, and caught herself watching his throat work. He did not look like a monster. He did not look like a god. He looked like someone who had learned to be small. "Why are you here?" she asked at last. "Exile," he said. "Ship failed. Colony protocol required return. I failed to return." The word "returned" tasted like a ritual. "I sought refuge in the gravity of a small planet. I hid. The protocol hunts those who cannot follow the path." "You speak oddly," Elena said. Her voice shook once and then steadied. "But I can understand you. How did you—" "I learned cadence. I learned skin." He touched his face, the translucent membrane, with fingers that seemed to find the circumference of their borrowed humanness with reverence. "You saved me from human hunters." "Human hunters," she repeated. The phrase struck her like a dropped coin. She saw images behind Kai's words, black cloaks, drones cutting the fog like knives, men in government jackets who had once turned Mateo's distress into a dossier. Her throat closed. "Who are you to them?" "I am envoy, unmade," Kai replied. "To my people I was supposed to be representative, but the protocol judged me unable. To yours, I am something dangerous." He made a slow, almost embarrassed gesture at his own chest. "Both are true." She thought of the Navy pier where she had found him. Abandoned, rusting, a place where fishermen left cigarette butts and secrets to rot. Elena had grown into secrecy the way some people grew into homes, by necessity. Her brother's disappearance had taught her to hide things inside her, like refugees. She hid her ruin in the lines of her face and the questions that never left her hand. Now another life was folded into that shadow, and that connection hurt in a way that was not just pity, but something sharper. She had not come to this night to start a rebellion. She had come because the world under the official lights had stolen someone she loved, and now she had in her living room a being whose lifespan might hold the memory of the same theft. "You owe me a life debt," Kai said abruptly, as if translating the calculus of survival into something practical. "I was taught to refuse attachments. Exile altered instruction. I owe you for harboring." "I don't want debts," Elena said. "I want answers. My brother." "Mateo?" Kai's voice dropped into a tone he had learned somewhere, tender and unfamiliar. He mouthed the name as if testing its weight. "Name of one who sings to sea?" Elena stared. "You know him." "I know of missions," Kai said carefully. "I know of vessels that are not meant to be seen. I know of archives in the cold places. I do not know your brother's fate." The admission was blunt, an honesty that was almost cruel in its simplicity. I can look. I can try. Something in her broke and reassembled. It was not complete solace. It was a new axis on which the world could turn. She should have demanded proof, a piece of technology, a name, a star chart. Instead, she felt her mouth answer before she thought. Then stay. This is dangerous, Kai said. Everything is, she replied. They established rules like people in a ship setting coordinates. No visitors, no leaving the immediate perimeter after dusk, no attempting to contact his people. She lied to herself about the morality of these rules and to Kai about the breadth of her own desperation. She told him stories of tide pools and the way moonlight silvered the backs of pelicans. He listened with a patience that made her think of deep oceans where time boiled differently. Sometimes he would mimic a laugh he had heard on some intercepted broadcast and make a small, pleased sound at its effect. When she woke in the night, she would watch him from the doorway, the way he curled into the couch as if he were asleep, and imagine him slipping into the skin of someone her brother might have been. Outside, the city pulsed with its indifferent life. Some nights a patrol drone would pass like a mechanical moth, its sensors trained on richer promises than an old boathouse. Elena kept a small arsenal of human tricks, burner phones, misleading addresses, a network of fishermen who owed her favors because she'd once patched a net that belonged to Rusty the dockhand. She had learned to make friends with people who trafficked in small mercies. They came now with sandwiches and dubious stories about where they'd seen strange lights over the water. Elena fed Kai and watched him memorize the way her mouth moved when she said the simplest words. He taught her, in return, how to hold silence like a shield, and how to tell when someone on the other side of a door meant to harm you. "Do they know what we can do?" Elena asked one night as his fingers traced the lines of a map he had drawn in charcoal, attempts at coastlines and symbols he said belonged to his home. Kai looked at her then with a solemnity she had not yet seen. They fear what they cannot classify. Protocol is simple. If a species demonstrates capacity for intentional cruelty, the archive marks them. If they show mercy that cannot be simulated, the question becomes complex. He sighed, a small mechanical sound like breath through glass. Your species has history. I have history, she said. She thought of the file stamped confidential that had once arrived in a courier's hands like a lethal pet, of the way the government had trained its tongue to be polite when the pain in her chest was not. Mine was drafted by men who hide behind policy. You are not like them, Kai said. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that in a boathouse with fog seeping through the boards and the sea ringing like a low bell, she could learn whether Mateo was alive. She wanted to be the kind of person who trusted that knowledge without cost. But the ledger balanced itself, as Kai had said. Every favor had a counterweight. She would soon learn what his debt required. For now, they kept small hours, measured breaths, and clung to domestic rituals, making tea, turning the pages of a tattered marine atlas, teaching Kai how to sneeze like a human so he would not attract attention in marketplaces when she would eventually have to run errands. When Kai smiled at the smell of coffee, when he mimicked the weary way she rubbed her temples after midnight, Elena felt the first fragile stirrings of something that was not solely utility. It frightened her. Love had always been an unsteady currency in her life, taxed heavily by absence. Yet there, on the couch between maps and the soft ticking of the aquarium pump, two exiles made a small, precarious truce with fate. Outside, unseen, a drone monitored a different ledger, and somewhere in a government archive, a file on an astronaut and a missing vessel unrolled its secrets with a slow, bureaucratic cruelty. Elena slept poorly and dreamed of a corridor with a bruised coin of a star. In the morning, she woke to find Kai watching her, attentive as tide-worn stone, and she understood how perilously intimate mercy could become. The first time Elena realized that the line between curiosity and danger was also the line between care and betrayal was the night she let the radio play under the couch. They had made the rule, half in jest at first, no open frequencies, no names said aloud in realms of static and surveillance. But rules had a way of loosening when loneliness pressed hard. The radio was an old thing, rescued from a beach cleanout and patched with duct tape and hope. It hissed and offered headlines and the sound of ships and men's voices that knew how to soften suspicion. Kai had been asleep, curled, impossibly small for someone whose ribs she could see through thin skin. And Elena had thought she could listen to the world without speaking her own pleading into it. A voice cut through the droning white noise. Unidentified object recovered off Old Harbor Pier. Her fingers tightened on the radio, as if that could stop the world. The reporter's cadence folded the words into a shape she'd learned to recognize, tragedy recited from mass consumption. Elena pressed the device to her ear, breath caught in the back of her throat, and the fog outside seemed to rock the boathouse like a slow sea. Officials refused to comment on alleged extraterrestrial involvement. A source within. Elena's hand went cold. She swallowed and turned, imagining uniforms at the gate. Kai stirred, eyelids fluttering, the borrowed skin on his face catching moonlight and throwing it into pale gold striations. He made a small sound, not quite a moan, and turned toward the radio with the primitive curiosity of someone learning the shape of a new danger. She cut the radio with one practiced motion, heart stuttering. "No," she said, to the device, to the fog, to the universe that kept rearranging her losses into new, sharper geometries. Kai's eyes opened fully then, and he looked at her with the ringed clarity she had come to read like tide marks. "Did you hear that?" He blinked. Sound meant different things to him. Tones were not only noise, but an architecture he could explore. "A network of voices," he said. "They discuss retrieval." "Retrieval," Elena repeated. The word tasted like old blood. Her mind spun immediate, practical things. Where to hide, how to mislead, what to burn and what to bury. Pull the curtain, lock the back door, erase footprints from the sand. She had practiced these motions since Mateo's disappearance. She had learned to ghost the evidence of her own life, so the state couldn't find a leverage point. Now those motions were for someone who could alter coastlines if mistrusted. "Are they hunting you?" she asked Kai. "They hunt protocol breaches," he said. "They hunt us when their markers flare. The sound you cut was a pre-pattern. Recovery teams, drones, they are organized." Elena's mouth went dry. "We need a plan," she said. And then, because the muscle memory of being a protector was older than grief, she set about making one. She taught Kai the names of the exits and the backs of buildings. She trained him on rusted, practical things. How to pull shoes tighter so his prints matched a fisherman's tread. How to untie knots that would hold under rough hands. How to breathe in a way that hid whatever alien rhythm might otherwise seep through. He learned quickly, with a mimicry both beautiful and terrifying, a capacity to duplicate the gestures of survival that made her dizzy with hope. At night, after they had practiced and patched and hidden, they sat together with the map Kai had drawn. The charcoal smudges traced coastlines that were less a geography than a memory, curves that repeated like a language he had carried in internal maps. He pointed to a place between two shoals and said, "This is where a pocket in the archive exists. There are records, but they are sealed." "Sealed by whom?" Elena asked. "By those who decide what constitutes mercy and what constitutes malice," Kai said. "Protocol sits like a judge with no compassion for context." "You mean you were judged for not doing something," she said, feeling the old ledger again. "For not following orders? For refusing what?" He covered his face with hands that were too graceful for the world they inhabited. The translucent membrane pulsed with each breath. I refused execution of beings that were catalogued to be culled. I could not support their judgment. The confession was small and terrible. It made the room felt colder, as if the fog had moved inside them and would not leave. Elena tasted betrayal in the way his voice made the consonants, not because he had done something wrong, but because the act of refusing had rippled out into consequences she could not imagine. Culled, she repeated, as in killed. Used in experiments, he said. Removed. The protocol determines if a species is likely to harm. Those who fail the humane calculus are neutralized. Neutralized. The word made Elena think of the stack of forms Shed once signed, consenting to clinical tests for the sake of a grant. It made her think of windows that closed on the last image of her brother. It made her see the bureaucrats who had smiled as they handed over sealed envelopes and said there would be more information soon. The ledger adjusted. "Why did they judge you?" she demanded, because she needed a place to put the trembling. "What did you do that wasn't normal?" "I showed hesitation," Kai said simply. "In our system, hesitation equals refusal. The colony feared hesitation because it could spread. Hesitation gives way to empathy. Empathy could be mistaken for weakness. They feared weakness." Elena thought of the time she had hesitated. Before texting the number that would have told her truth, before stepping into rooms where revelations lived in the hum of fluorescent lights. Hesitation had always cost her. Now, in a new bravery, she felt it become something softer. "Maybe empathy is not weakness," she said. "Maybe," Kai agreed, but the word was thin. In their records, human history is a mosaic of cruelty. It is used as evidence. "Your people read us like a dossier," Elena said. The idea that someone might measure humanity and pronounce it condemned because of misdeeds felt like a mirror held up to her chest. She thought instantly of Marcos, Agent Marcos, who had once loved the way her hands moved when she explained tidal patterns, and now loved the truth the way a hound loves a scent. He had the advantage of official sanction. His moral categories were enforced with warrants. The thought made her stomach tighten. "Marcos is watching," Kai said. The confession landed like an anchor. Elena felt the old heat flood back, equal parts anger and fear. "He suspected me when Mateo vanished," she said. He is, cautious. He has reasons." "Reason is a tool," Kai said. "So is suspicion. He will follow patterns." "Then we move first," Elena said, already plotting, already the woman who had once stapled a small child's life jacket that had torn at the seams, who had soldered together a broken radio with a patience that bordered on devotion. She thought of the list of people who owed her favors and how small mercies built networks. "We go to the fisherman. Rusty owes me. He knows how to pull a boat without asking questions. He can move things." And she hesitated. The next sentence felt like an admission. "What?" Kai asked. "People ask for proof," she said. "If you can show me something, anything that ties you to the mission my brother was on, I can use it. I can hide you better if I know where the lines connect." Kai looked at her then with a complexity of expression she had not yet learned to catalog. "I have a device," he said slowly, "a locator. It can tune in to the imprint left by vessels. It is small. It is dangerous. Show me." He hesitated as if the word itself had weight. "It will reveal me," he said. "It will put a signature into the air that those who listen will catch." They both sat in the hush of the boathouse, the sounds of the harbor like a slow argument outside. Elena thought about the file stamped confidential and of how seeking the truth had once cost her nothing but time. Now truth had teeth. Its bite could draw blood from either of them. But she also thought of Mateo, of the way his laugh had once filled a car like a tide, and that memory tightened like a hand at her back. If it can find him, if it can tell us whether he is alive, then we take the risk. Do you fear me? Kai asked, and his question was unadorned, direct, the kind of thing that made Elena's chest clench. At first, she admitted, I feared what you could do, how easily you shift between skin and voice. I feared you would read my grief and use it. Then I feared not enough. I feared I would spend the rest of my life waiting for proofs that would never come. He reached for her hand, at first clumsy with borrowed anatomy, and then with a deliberateness that made the room blur. His fingers were cool and surreal against her wrist. The membrane at his temple pulsed as if in time with her pulse. I do not wish to harm you, he said. I wish to learn. You teach me to be less hidden. You teach me to ask without always taking. That is strange for an exile. Elena's throat tightened dangerously. I teach you to be human, she said. The phrase was almost a dare, and the truth of it felt like stepping off a pier into cold water. And you teach me to risk. They made plans then on the surface of things. Rusty would take a mechanical crate out under the guise of salvage. Elena would schedule a supply run for the morning when patrols were light and pedestrians fewer. Kai would hide the locator inside tins of sardines, and they would make a trail of ordinary errands to disguise their intent. Underneath the logistics was something harder to measure, an unspoken agreement not to confess old wounds. Elena did not tell Kai about the night she had watched Mateo step into the capsule with a face lit by the hope of flight. She kept her brother's last photograph in the back of a drawer like contraband. Kai did not tell her the names of those he had refused to betray, or the details of a ship's last screaming descent. They were secrets folded into the margins of their cautious intimacy. Before they left, Elena stood at the window as dawn diluted the fog into a watercolor blur. Kai stood behind her, hands folded, summit lines of his borrowed bones visible. He leaned his forehead against the glass for a moment, as if feeling the world through that thin membrane. Elena pressed her palm to the cold and felt the space between them, and the ridiculous incandescent hope that perhaps they could keep one another from being consumed by the machine set to classify and cull. Whatever happens, Kai murmured, voice low, if you find him, tell me his favorite say. She cut him off with a laugh too quick and too bright. If we find him, I'll ask what his favorite constellation was, she said. He used to point out Orion every time we went camping. Orion, Kai repeated. A hunter marked in stars. She shivered at the analogy, and then, with a steadiness she didn't feel, she gathered their small kit, 2 hooded jackets, a thermos, coasters smudged with T-rings. When they stepped out into the washed world, Rusty's boat rocked at the dock like something waiting for a story to be told. Elena kept her hand tucked inside her pocket where the photograph of Mateo lay folded, its edges softened by the pressure of her thumb. She did not know which would prove more dangerous, the path toward a truth that might heal, or the path that would reveal them both to those who already kept a ledger. As they walked down the pier, Kai at her side like a shadow made of foreign light, Elena felt the old ledger slacken and buckle, then retighten around a new calculus. She didn't yet grasp the cost. She only felt, with a clarity that frightened her, that she was about to place her trust on a balance whose other side was a world of men who kept files and of a people who judged species by a single, devastating criterion. The crate thunked into the belly of Rusty's skiff like a heartbeat dropped into deep water. And for a second, Elena imagined the noise would echo all the way to the archive rooms where files breathed like sleeping predators. She kept her hands in her pockets so the photograph of Mateo would not print itself into her palm, a talisman she could not bear to show, yet could not bear to leave behind. Rusty grinned, the kind of grin that folded up years of favors and spat them back as solid currency. He handed her a coil of rope with the casual affection of someone who had been owed small kindnesses by the sea and by her. The dawn slipped sideways across the harbor, uncurling ghosts of light. Kai stood at the edge of the dock, holding the sardine tins like sacramental vessels. He had bound the locator inside one of them with a strip of the same thin fishing line Elena had seen at his ear. The device itself was a memory folded into metal, an emissary of signals that hummed when he brushed his palm over its casing. He looked like he was learning to be human in the act of waiting, shoulders relaxed, mouth slack, eyes that still held that uncanny, concentric clarity. He watched Elena with an attention that made her think of a predator learning the shape of another creature before a decision to pounce or spare. "Do not let them scan the boat," she told Rusty. "Keep the hull below the waterline clear of anything metallic that might sing." Rusty snorted. "Darlin', I sink more things than I find. We good." He winked, then turned to secure the crate. Elena offered him cash and a hand that steadied in exchange for his loyalty. The man who had once fished for a living now smuggled favors and the occasional secret. He was not a hero, but he understood debts. They pushed off, the motor coughing, the skiff slipping out into a harbor that was waking with engines and lines. Elena stood at the stern, the salt air lashing, and kept one hand on the crate as if that were enough to anchor the whole fragile plan. Kai sat beside her, knees cramped, the sardine tins warm against his thighs. Every so often, he would bring his face close to the tin and whisper a sound that made the metal answer like a sleeping animal. Elena watched him. The way his borrowed skin went seamless when he focused on small domestic acts. It unnerved her that such intimacy could be practiced like a trade. It reassured her that he had the capacity to copy tenderness. They reached the cove where Rusty claimed there was an old wreck that would distract any routine patrols. Elena slipped off the boat and waded to shore, mud swallowing her boots with a slur like something trying to claim her steps. Kai followed, careful, the sardine tins clutched as if they were the sum of his dignity. The plan was simple. Place the locator near a known signature, an old buoy where the archive's residuals had brushed the water years ago, and let it sing its small, indiscreet song. The beacon would hum for mere minutes. If the archive had records, if there were echoes of vessels like the one Mateo had boarded, the locator might light them like a map. Then they would be a step closer to a truth that could either save them or bury them deeper. They set the device among rocks with hands that trembled, pretending calm. Elena's breath hitched when Kai brushed her fingers. Accidental, purposeful, she couldn't tell. He smiled then, a small, earnest thing that fit the borrowed face like a mask. "Close," he said, "close to where the water remembers." "That's poetic," she lied. "Try to be inconspicuous." He hummed, and after a series of soft clicks, the locator breathed a tone like wind through a seashell. It began to gather, to attune to histories buried in salt. Elena dug her nails into her palm to anchor herself and watched the device light with tiny pulses. For a moment, she imagined the pulses were the answer, Mateo alive, making his way back home. The thought filled her so completely she felt lightheaded. Then the sound came, a high, stuttering ping that didn't belong to the sea. A drone, a slender, white thing, cut the air as if it had been invisible until the ping woke it. It spiraled, a mechanical gull with a predatory algorithm, and then it shivered like a startled insect and turned its dome toward them. "Run," Rusty hissed, and Elena felt her body obey a command older than fear. They scattered like gulls, everything practiced in the small hours of survival becoming muscle memory, vanishing beneath crates, slipping between rocks, disappearing into the reeds. Kai moved fast and human then, his long fingers finding grips on algae-slick stone with a grace that belied the skin he wore. The drone whirred, its sensors pinpricking the air. Elena could see its camera eyes catching Kai's silhouette, the way it pattern-recognized something it had been programmed to categorize. They were not fast enough. A squadron of black SUVs rolled onto the gravel like a blight, men in government vests leaping out with the precise brutality of trained scribes. Someone barked orders, and the sound swallowed the cove. Elena's breath came shallow, The plan had always assumed stealth, not frontline engagement. Kai froze, eyes wide, and Elena felt the old ledger snap tight. Across the line of men stood a single figure whose presence made the world tilt: Marcos. He looked the way he always did when he thought he owned the wind. Clean-cut, hair gelled with official confidence, jaw set to a determination she had once admired and now hated. For a terrible, private half-second, Elena thought of Mateo and Marcos together, the two men sliding into different orbits of her life. Marcos' gaze landed on her with the slow recognition of someone who had been waiting for evidence of guilt. "Elena," he said, his voice flat, "step away from the device." She could have lied. She could have spun a story about salvage and misplacement. Instead, a hot, ridiculous honesty flared inside her. "He's not a device," she said. "He's a what?" Marcos snapped. "Who are you hiding, Elena? This is a recovery operation." The words were precise as legal razors. Somewhere behind them, a hapless assistant clicked a camera, and the sound felt like a needle. Rusty cursed and tried to bar the SUV with his body. Someone shoved him aside. Elena found herself stepping between Marcos and Kai like an animal defending a strange pup. The gesture was small and stupid and recklessly human. "Back away," Marcos ordered. "We have orders." Kai's eyes flicked between Elena and the men, and then he did something Elena had not given him permission to do. He reached for her hand. The touch was electric. It felt as if someone had connected a wire to a battery inside her chest. Kai's fingers were cool, his touch both alien and intimate, and the moment his palm met hers, the air shifted. For a heartbeat, Elena tasted not fear, but a flood of images. Corridors, a face like Mateo's, a window where a star had shamed the dark with its stubborn light. Then the images faded, and left behind a clarity that was almost unbearable. Marcos stepped forward, his expression a mix of triumph and pity. "You think you can hide an unregistered subject? Do you know what you're risking? This is a federal protocol." Kai's voice cut him off, low and strangely composed. "We are not subjects," he said. "We are beings. We have names." The men laughed, the kind of hardened noise that tries to make cruelty sound routine. An officer reached for Kai as if the contact could be contained by a hand. Kai did not recoil. Instead, he unfurled his hand and placed it on the officer's forehead. The man stared. Then his mouth loosened into a noise Elena couldn't place. Was it rage? Was it comprehension? His shoulders slumped. He blinked, seemed to forget what he had come for. Elena watched in a blend of horror and awe. Kai's touch did something the dossier language could not account for. It unraveled reaction. The officer's eyes flooded not with tears, but with a sudden, raw memory of a time he had been kind to a child, of a mother who had smelled of bread. He stepped back, bewildered, and the line of men staggered as if they had walked through a wind that rearranged their sense of duty. "He's manipulating them," someone shouted. "He's some kind of empathic." "Stop!" Marcos barked, but the command mishit the room. The agents wavered, some collapsing to one knee with hands pressed to their faces, some weeping openly. Seeing it, Elena felt a cold surge of terror. This was the protocol's nightmare. Empathy that could shift orders, that could make men remember what had once been soft in them. The ledger that had justified culling trembled when confronted with living compassion. Kai looked at Elena then, eyes ringed and fragile as a creature that had learned too late the weight of mercy. "I do not wish to harm," he murmured. "I did not mean to." "You used them," Rusty spat. "You used their heads. You could have killed us." "No," Kai said. "I gave them back a piece they had traded away." Elena's chest tightened. The argument glittered like a broken shell. Mercy as weapon, mercy as healing. Marco's face had gone an ugly color of official injury. He motioned for backup on a wrist comm, and the sound of it was like a verdict. "Detain them," he ordered. "All of them. Elena Morales, you are under investigation for harboring an unregistered entity." The words hit like winter. Elena's mouth filled with the taste of metal. She had known this day might come. She had rehearsed it in the private theater of terror that was her life. But when the actor stepped onto the stage, she realized plans were only as good as the people executing them. The men in black moved forward, and for the first time, Elena understood the scope of the fracture between them. The government had a file and procedures, but Kai had an entire foreign scale of judgment that could not be measured by forms. "Mateo," she said, in a voice like a stone dropped into water. "If you know anything, any trace, tell me now." Kai's fingers tightened on her hand. He looked at her with something that might be pity. "I can search anchors," he said, "but it requires a memory anchor from you, something linked to him." She felt the island of control she'd built her life upon shifting. Without a photograph, without a word, without a fragment of Mateo's world, she had nothing to offer. She had kept a photograph in her pocket like a secret prayer. She slid it out, hands trembling, and placed it in Kai's palm. When he looked at the photograph, the borrowed skin at his temple glowed faintly. His breath hitched, and the room narrowed. Around them, the men in black were reforming, uniforms straightening, orders reasserting themselves like a health returning to a body. Marcos's eyes were hard as a cliff. Elena felt small and naked, the ledger now listing her as both traitor and savior. Kai closed his eyes. "This anchor is heavy," he said. "It will call a storm." Elena wanted to protest, to fear the storm. But the sky above the harbor was already bruised with weather, and her heart had been battered too many times by waiting. She gave him the photograph entirely, the act a small surrender. It was a debt and a prayer intertwined. Marcos moved forward again, cuff in hand. "You are coming with us," he said to Elena, as if they had reached the inevitable end of a story. Behind him, the cove hummed with machines and men, and the low, persistent grief of a society that catalogued strangers like specimens. Kai's hand tightened on the photograph, as if to signal a promise. The device in the sardine tin pulsed like something waking. The air hummed. Somewhere beyond the sirens and the orders, a net began to tighten, a protocol that measured and judged and threatened to break them both. Elena breathed in and, fractured as she already was, found a brittle courage. She put her hands out, palms open, and did the most human thing she had left. She stepped between the men and Kai, and, in a voice that had once soothed injured birds and calmed storm-fearful fishermen, she said, "If you take him, you take my last hope. If you take me, you take the last thread to Mateo. Decide which ledger you will keep, Agent Marcos. Choose." Marcos hesitated, as if the choice might be weighty enough to scald him. For a heartbeat, the world held a fragile breath, and then orders resumed their rhythm. The fracture widened, a line in the sand. Men moved. Kai held the photograph as if it were an offering, and then, with a speed that was almost flight, he touched the locator. The device screamed once, an answer, and the cove answered back, each wave a ripple of the past, each echo a name. What the archive would remember, and what the protocol would do with that memory, teetered on that scream. The locator screamed, and the world buckled into a different dimension of sound, an honest, keening frequency that pulled at something buried in salt and metal and the soft tissue of memory. Men staggered, instruments pinging like nervous birds. For a breath, the archive's net felt visible, a lattice of attention tightening around them, threads of protocol drawn from far-off rooms where committees cleared their throats and voted on the moral status of living things. Elena heard it as an actual sound, a high keening she felt in her teeth. She had imagined being brave. She had not imagined courage could hurt like that. Kai did not flinch. He held the photograph with both hands as if it were a talisman that would steady him against whatever the locator had called back. His voice, when he spoke, was thin with the effort of translation between species. "I will anchor," he said. "I will call what remembers." "No!" Marcos barked, but the word was swallowed by the locator's small, obscene hymn. Agents recovered composure like men reapplying masks. Rusty cursed and lunged toward the device, but Elena blocked him with an arm she did not know she possessed. She had rehearsed barricades in her head, but she had not rehearsed the tremor in her own hands as she pressed them flat against the tin. Kai closed his eyes. The room leaned inward. Images spilled from him like oil from a crack. Corridors folded in light. A flash of Mateo's profile as if photographed by a star. The cramped insignia of a vessel whose name Elena had never known and now could only taste on the back of her tongue. The locator picked his spill-ups like a thirsty listener, and where it struck the archive's quiet, there was a flaring of attention, an answering ping, an access token opening in a faraway vault. Someone shouted, an order transmitting back and forth in that shorthand that officials use when fear shortens civility. The SUV's doors barked open, and more uniforms poured out. Elena felt the world shrink to the width of Kai's shoulders and the photograph between them. He seemed to be recalling and translating at once. Memories he found, snippets of recordings, log fragments. He did not hoard. He gave them away like small, bloody offerings. With each piece he released, the agent softened, not uniformly, but in ways that made the whole operation stagger. The officer at the front row knelt, mouth open, tears carving clean trails through grime as if some private grief had been handed back. Elena stepped forward, reckless, because the ledger that had measured her life into units of loss demanded counterbalance. "Listen," she called, to the men and the machines and to the weather that seemed to be deciding whether it would be a witness. "Listen to what he gives us. He is not a weapon. He is a witness." Marcos looked at her with the terrible patience of someone who had once loved and now measured love as risk. "Evidence, Morales," he said. "We need chain of custody. We need authenticated signatures. This is not." "Chain of custody won't tell you how he looked at me when I gave him a blanket," Kai said, his voice audible in spite of the chaos. "Chain of custody will not say who sang to Mateo in the dark." He opened his palms, exposing the photograph fully. Under the street lamps, the grain of the paper glowed with a cheap holiness. "I can show you footprints," he said. "I can show you corridors. I can show you names." Someone with a tablet began tapping, as if to record the claim. A woman in a plain suit stepped forward, the kind of bureaucrat who held a pen as if to bless policy. "If he can provide verifiable data," she said, "we can pursue it within protocol." For once, Elena breathed, the words "a knife and a salve both," "let us pursue someone's life instead of a piece of property." Kai's hands trembled. He set the photograph against the tin and, with a concentration that made him look older than his thin shoulders, reached into the memory he had been piecing together. He let go, and the locator answered him in a cascade of sound that no human file should have been able to translate. Coordinates, a schematic slice of a hull, a voice print that was unmistakable. Elena felt it like electricity. The name of a vessel, the echo of Mateo's laugh recorded in something like a docking log. The agent with the tablet froze, then raised an eyebrow, then typed faster. "It matches," she said, incredulous and suddenly alive with the bureaucratic thrill of proof. "We've got a latch, an imprint that's consistent with Mission Tethys." The name dropped into the cove like a stone. Elena knew that name, saw it once in a redacted file, and it made her stomach drop. Tethys. Her hands went cold, her throat filled with something close to prayer. Marcos' jaw tightened. "Even so," he said, "we cannot make operational decisions based on a human being's ability to recall," Elena snapped. Her voice was thin, but the fury behind it steadied her. "You think your machines are the only arbiters? You think paper can hold every life?" Kai interrupted, voice breaking free like something released from captivity. "Mateo is in an archive," he said, "not destroyed, not erased. The mission encountered an event. Some were sealed in stasis. The archive holds records and bodies. He choked on the pronoun that covered his people's protocol. They judged and they saved some. I can open a trace to the bay where the vessel left residue. I can show the path for recovery." The agents exchanged glances that were contracts in miniature. The woman with the tablet began arranging permissions, fingers moving in a choreography that could swing a verdict. Marco's face hardened. He was not the man who had loved Elena's laugh anymore. He was the man who had been taught policy as pretext. He steadied himself like a cliff against the incoming tide, and then, to Elena's astonishment, lowered his hand. "Make it fast," he said. "We bring in the retrieval team. We do this by the book." Elena wanted to seize him and shake out the softness she thought she had once loved, but she bit her tongue and nodded. Books could be opened, pages could be read. She had learned the value of incremental victories. A door unlocked was better than a vault left untouched. Rusty grinned like a man who just sold a lie for cash and then realized the lie might be true. Agents readied ropes and crates and scanners. Kai's locator had quieted into a hum like a purring animal. He looked exhausted and exultant all at once. Elena reached for his hand without permission and found that he did not withdraw. They stood, photograph warm under his palm, as the government reconfigured itself into the unlikely posture of rescue. Men argued about liability and jurisdiction. A helicopter's blades began to whir distant and then closer, a ceremonial drumbeat for the next act. In the small pocket of time before the retrieval equipment arrived, Elena stepped closer to Kai. The fog had lifted its face, and the harbor looked like a city exhaling. "You could have run," she said quietly. "I could have," Kai admitted. "I did once. I learned that running leaves others to keep pain. There is cost to staying. You taught me that." She laughed, a short sound edged with tears. "I did not teach you compassion, I only showed you mine." "So we exchange," he said, and in the tilt of his voice there was the strange currency of people who had no proper words for what they meant. "You give hope, I give trace." It was not the kind of vow carved into stone. It was a barter made on the wind. Elena felt the ledger shift again, not erased, not even balanced, but altered. Here, in the glow of portable halogens and the inexpert choreography of men suddenly converted into saviors, she found herself thinking of small things. Mateo's laugh, the way he had once fallen asleep with his face in a book, the smell of frying garlic on a winter morning. She wanted those small things back. She wanted more than a legal opinion. She wanted the messy, human restoration of a life. Marcos watched them with an expression Elena could not read. Perhaps he had never forgiven her for the nights she had stormed a government office, pounding on bureaucracy like a drum. Perhaps he had simply seen a case where policy and compassion intersected and chosen the safer route, action instead of accusation. He barked a sequence of orders into his comm, and then, with a precision that surprised her, turned to Kai. "You will be contained," he said, "official and final. Protocol." The word felt like a guillotine. Elena felt a manual of preparation spin in her chest. Paperwork, lawyers, the slow grind of appeals. But Kai's eyes did not dart to escape. Instead, he looked at her, and, with a softness that undid something in Elena she had thought stone, he pressed his forehead to hers. For a moment, the world condensed to the small, absurdly intimate pressure of skin on skin. a saline, electric silence. "If this costs me my exile," he whispered, "let it cost something worth the memory." "If it costs you everything," Elena said, "then I will cost myself with you." They kissed then, not the polished promise of cinema, but the desperate barter of two beings whose economies had been ravaged by absence. It was a sealing of allegiance, a contract written in touch. Around them, men readied ropes and drones and the slow instruments of retrieval, and above their heads, the sky accepted a new kind of claim on mercy. When the retrieval team waded into the water and the heavy machinery began the slow work of undoing old secrets, Elena felt something that resembled hope and terror braided together. Marco's voice came over the hiss of activity, clipped and professional. "We will follow procedure," he said. "No public disclosure beyond necessary channels." Elena wanted to laugh or to spit. Instead, she unfolded her hands and found Kai's, warm and trembling. "If Tethys is in that archive," she said, only half confident, "then Matteo—" "Will be found," Kai finished. He did not speak with certainty, only with a conviction born of memory's depth. "If he is there, we will find him. If not, we will know where he was taken." The machinery groaned, and the cove took on the look of a stage as men played their parts. Elena and Kai sat together on a cooler, hands clasped, watching the work begin. Around them, the ledger of the world unspooled in small bureaucratic knots, forms signed, chains established, a retrieval team that smelled of oil and adrenaline. It was ugly and hopeful and painfully human. When the first sealed crate was hauled from the water and the retrieval team cracked the lid for inspection, Elena felt the air itself hold a breath that had been waiting decades. The men gathered in a tight ring, cameras trained, breath visible in the cold. Elena's heart knocked. Whatever came out would be the verdict. It was a man who coughed, then made a sound like laughing through tears. He was gaunt and salt-scraped, his hands shaking as if he had been sewn to the crate and the stitches had just been cut. His eyes, when they found Elena's, widened with a recognition so fierce it nearly bowled her over. "Elena?" he rasped. "Matteo." The world rearranged into a single word. She made a sound that was neither scream nor laugh, but both, and she lunged, all the plans and protocols and ledgers collapsing beneath the simple human impulse to hold the brother she had thought lost. Kai stepped back, hands unclasping with a dignity that owned sacrifice. As Elena gathered Matteo into herself, the retrieval team swore, and a man in a suit, someone from the embassy or the archive, stepped forward, murmuring about containment and observation. Elena did not hear them. She only felt the rough cloth of Matteo's jacket, the way his breath smelled faintly of metal and sleep. She pressed her face to him as if to anchor him back into life. Behind her, Kai watched with an expression that was both victory and mourning. For all he'd given, for all she'd risked, they had reached a shore where mercy had overridden protocol long enough for a human to be found. Marcos exhaled slowly, like a man who had been given a reprieve from the verdict he'd been certain would come. He did not smile. He did not soften particularly. But when Elena looked up and saw him, there was a flicker, a recognition, perhaps, of what she'd argued in the cove, that sometimes a file could not account for the texture of a life. He kept his distance, professional and wary, and his hand remained on his comm like a man who still trusted orders more than instincts. Kai stepped away then, as if his presence might complicate the miracle that had happened. Elena turned and reached for him without thinking, fingers finding his arm. "Stay," she said simply. He looked at her, and in his gaze there was the warning of a planet that had drilled survival into its people. Exile might be eternal, and mercy might attract hunters. But he did not move. "I will stay," he said, "for now." Elena's laugh was a wet, astonished sound. She had no illusions about the future. The archive would not be dislodged by this one crate. Protocols would sharpen their teeth, and men like Marcos would feel vindicated on days when suspicion paid dividends. But for a moment, in the glare of halogen and the smell of salt and machine oil and the small, bewildered warmth of her brother's return, the ledger slackened. Elena realized that redemption had a forward edge. It demanded claim and sacrifice in equal measure. She had given up caution. Kai had risked exile. Together they had reclaimed a life. They would pay later. They would be judged and loved and hunted and defended in a world that had no easy categories. But in the cove, with the retrieval team methodically reading out inventories, and with Mateo coughing back his life like an ember, Elena understood something catastrophic and true. That mercy, when practiced loudly enough, could unmake a verdict. They moved through the aftermath like survivors who had found a harbor after a storm and did not yet know whether the shore would hold. Mateo leaned on Elena as doctors whispered over him, scanning for the fractures exile had left. He was alive, stitched together with salt and bureaucratic neglect, blinking as if every blink reacquainted him with light. Marcos barked orders into his comm, then softened around a single corner of his mouth as he observed the human reunion. Even he could not deny the raw fact in front of him. The retrieval team cataloged crates, the archivists argued about jurisdiction, and a plain-suited woman scribbled forms that would later be used to justify whatever came next. Elena let them all talk while she sat on a cooler with Mateo's hand folded into hers, letting the ache she had held for years bleed into the clean, small miracle of his breath against her wrist. Kai stood a little apart, watching the choreography of rescue and paperwork with an attention that had nothing to do with procedure. He had offered up memory and risk and exile. The cost had been counted in nights without sleep and in the slow erasure of his anonymity. He understood now something his protocol had never taught, that staying could be a kind of victory equal to flight. Elena caught him looking at Mateo and, in that glance, saw a grief that was not hers, but which felt like a cousin of it. The sorrow of a being who had been judged and then used compassion to overturn a verdict. Marcos approached at last, the comm's light dead on his shoulder, as if he had chosen to put the machine away for a moment and simply speak. "We will open an inquiry," he said, voice steady, the law reasserting itself in tones. "Containment will be arranged for him. There will be hearings." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Make them transparent," she said. "No sealed files, no decisions without witnesses." He considered her, then nodded, the motion small and hard-won. "Agreed," he said, which was not forgiveness, but a concession. Later, when the crates had been sorted and the television vans had left like birds dispersing from a feeding, Elena walked the pier with Mateo, steadying himself on her other side, and Kai shadowing them both. The early light cut the fog into ribbons. Mateo, gaunt but steadier, pointed up at a thinning sky and smiled, a crooked, exhausted curve she had missed like a limb. "Orion?" he asked, voice raw. "Orion," Elena whispered back. Kai watched the constellation with the hunger of one learning human myth. He folded his hands as if the sight required a ritual he had only just been taught. For a moment, the three of them, sister, brother, exile, stood in a line that did not erase what had been taken, but made a new shape of allegiance. When they turned to go, Kai stayed a beat longer, facing the water. He inhaled salt and city and the ghost of a song Elena had once heard him hum in the boathouse. "I will be contained," he said, voice steady, "but I will testify. I will teach them to read mercy back into the ledger." Elena slipped her hand into his for a heartbeat, a pact in flesh. "Then teach," she said. "Teach them what we already know, that people are not evidence, they are stories." As they walked back toward the town, the fog peeled away and left a harbor that looked like an old wound healing, scar tissue, new bloom. Above their heads Orion burned patient, a hunter who could not decide whether to chase or to watch. Elena felt the ledger balance not by erasure but by accounting. Loss paid forward into rescue. Exile traded for testimony. Fear softened by the stubborn calculus of human kindness. In that trembling new ordinary, she let herself imagine a morning when the archive would open its doors and someone would read not a file, but a life. The image stayed with her, a photograph of Mateo, damp with salt, glinting in the dawn. And she walked toward it with Kai and her brother at her side, knowing the peace they had earned would be provisional, fierce, and, for now, enough.